Hi friends, welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to talk about network security groups. So the overall topics that we need to discuss is, first we are going to start discussing on what is a network security group, how do you create network security group rules, what do you understand by NSG effective rules, and then I'm going to show you a demo on how to configure these rules. Now, understanding network security group is nothing but it is kind of a virtual firewall available to you. So let's say if you have certain VMs deployed in your network and you want to limit traffic to those VMs, maybe you only want to allow RDP port. So if you want to connect over the internet, you only want to allow port 3389. Or if it is a web server and you only want to allow port 80 or port 443 in order to connect to those web servers. For those use cases, you basically leverage a network security group. So it basically limits your network traffic to your resources in your virtual network, mainly your VMs. You can create different kind of rules. So these can be inbound or outbound rules you can create. You can associate a network security group at a subnet level or at a NIC card level as well. So when you create a VM on Azure, basically it gives you a virtual NIC card assigned to you. On that virtual NIC card, you can associate a network security group, or you usually associate it with the subnet. In most cases, enterprises prefer associating this network security group at a subnet level because it becomes easy to manage all the VMs that are part of a subnet. If you're associating a network security group at a VM level or at a NIC level, it becomes really difficult for you to manage it. You can also associate the same network security group multiple times. So maybe you can repurpose the same network security group for most of your deployments. Okay, so this is a brief overview of about network security group. Now let's look at some of the rules you can create within a network security group. So by default, you're given 3 rules when you create a network security group. These rules are inbound and outbound. So if you look at the diagram on your screen, you can see there are 3 rules created for me. So the first rule that you see over here is it is allowing all the traffic from one virtual network to the virtual network. So it allows all the traffic within the virtual network. So if you have VMs that are part of the virtual network, they will be able to communicate with each other by default. So these are inbound rules. And then you have another rule where it is allowing traffic from a load balancer to any network in the backend. And the third rule is any other traffic is denied. So first rule allows all the communication within the network. Any traffic from a load balancer to any other network is allowed, and all other traffic is by default denied. So these are inbound rules. Then you have some default outbound rules also configured over here. In case of default outbound rules, all communication between virtual network to virtual network is allowed. All communication from any place to internet is also allowed. So by default, outbound access to internet is allowed. And all other traffic is basically denied. So you have these 3 rules available to you. These rules cannot be deleted. So if you see, this delete option is graded out for you. So you can't delete the default rules. You can always override these rules. How do you override these rules? By creating a rule with a higher priority. So when I talk about priority, you can see one of the rules that I've created is for RDP, and the priority for this is 300. So when I talk about rule creation, the priority can depend on, so the lower the number, higher the priority. So if I have, let's say, rule 100, this will have the lowest priority. And if I have rule like 4000, this will have, this is the lowest number and the highest priority. Highest priority. So lowest number, but highest priority is given to rule 100. And if you have a rule like 4000, it will have basically lower priority. So 100 is the lowest number you can go to, and it will have the highest priority. So if I create a rule with value 100 as a priority, it will take precedence over all the rules that I'm going to create. Usually you don't create rules like this. Usually you keep a gap between some rules. So maybe you start out creating rules from 300. Then the second rule you create is 310. And likewise, you basically add more rules. Why do we do this? In case, let's say, you have some new rule that you need to create. If there is no gap between these rules, you will not be able to create new rules in between this. So maybe I want to create a 305 rule later on where I'm allowing some HTTP traffic. So what I can do later on, I can always create these rules. That's why you always keep a gap. So most enterprises do this, and most enterprises also create a deny rule. So if you have an outbound rule created over here, by default, you can see you can go to the internet and you can talk to the internet. Whereas most enterprises would prefer that you should not be able to talk to the internet. So what you do, you basically create a deny rule, which can be 4,000 value. And using that rule, you're denying all the traffic going to the internet. So you create a higher number or lower priority rule, which basically denies all the traffic. And you basically create more rules which are allowing other traffic. Okay, so you'll create other rules if you want to send outbound traffic as well. Okay, so you have all these options available to you. Plus, these network security groups works on 5 tuple. So you have priority, you define the name of the rule, you define source port and protocol, you define the source that you're connecting from, you define the destination you're connecting to. So you define all these values, source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port, and protocol in order for your rule to work. You also define an action. Do you want to allow the rule or do you want to deny the rule? Okay. Now, let's look at this from a portal perspective. So if I log into my Azure portal, I need to go to network security groups. So once I go to network security group, within a network security group, I can see quite a few network security groups created for me. But if you want to create it from scratch, you click on create. And once you've clicked on create, you define your resource group. You define the name of your network security group, maybe NSG1. And then you basically create it. You will also create it in a specific region where you're going to deploy your workloads. So wherever your VMs are, you're going to keep this in the same region as well. So after you've created it, you click on review create and you create it. After you've created it, you'll see a network security group like this. Okay. In the overview panel, I can see the current rules. I can see the inbound rules and I can also see the outbound rules as well. So all the rules are actually shown to me in this overview panel. But if I want to deep dive into one of the rules, maybe I want to see the inbound security rules. I can go to this page and I can add more rules over here. Once I add rule, I define the source that I'm connecting from. So I can connect from the internet. I can connect from certain IPs. I can provide my IP from which I'm connecting. I can provide a service tag. A service tag is nothing but it is a group of IPs that are clubbed together. Or I can also define something called as application security group, which can logically segment these different resources for me. So I have all these options available to me. I define the source port. I define my destination, very similar to what you saw in the source. You define the service. Do you want to allow HTTP, HTTPS traffic or any other kind of traffic? You define the destination port ranges. You define either allow rule or deny rule, and you define protocols as well. Over here, if I provide priority as 5,000, so it'll give me an error that your priority can only be between 100 and 4096. So this is the limit or the range you have. You can't go beyond 4096. 4096 will be the lowest priority that you can have. So after you define all these values, you click on create and this is going to add the rule for you. Okay. So if I want to allow HTTP, I can create a rule for 4096 and maybe the rule name can be allow HTTP traffic. Once I click on add, this is going to basically create this rule. So once you add this rule, this will be available to you over here and it will have a higher priority than the default rules because default rules have priority around 65,000. Okay. If I don't want to see the default rules, I can always hide them. Now, after you created these rules, you can either define You can either associate them to a network interface, or I can also associate it at a subnet level. In most cases, you would prefer associating it at a subnet level. If I click on associate, I will associate with my whatever network that I've created. Usually you will go with this type of setup because it is easy to manage at a subnet level rather than managing this at a network interface level. Okay, so in most cases you would prefer associating it at a subnet level. Now, if you talk about network security groups, there are also some effective rules applicable in this case. So if you want to allow, let's say, port 80 or 443 over the internet, a rule must exist at each and every level where you have NSG associated. So let's say if I have two NSGs, NSG1 and NSG2. So NSG1 is associated to my subnet, NSG2 is associated to my NIC card. If I want to create such a rule, what I will do, I will basically create a rule 80 and 443, which is going inbound. So first my NSG1 will be evaluated, which is at a subnet level when the traffic is coming over the internet. This rule will be evaluated, and this rule, if it is allowed, it will allow the traffic to go to NSG2. If there is no rule for 80 and 443 in NSG2, the traffic will be dropped over here. But let's say if there is a rule which allows traffic. So there is an allow rule for 80 and 443. This traffic will then be sent to this area over here. So you'll see that this traffic will be routed to your backend. So whenever you are creating an inbound rule, first rules are evaluated at a subnet level. Whenever you're creating an outbound rule, the rules are first evaluated at a NIC card level. You have to remember this. This is really important. So whenever you create a rule which is coming from the internet, always create an allow rule from at the subnet level and then at the NIC level. And if you're creating any rule which is for outbound traffic, you always create the rule over here, which is allowing the traffic over here, and you allow the rule over here in order to allow the traffic to flow. If you don't have an allow rule, this will not allow you to send the traffic from one area to the other area. So that's really important for you to understand. Where do you see these effective rules? So if you go back to your NSG, if I go to my NSG, there is an area called as effective security rules. If I click on this effective security rules, in this effective security rules, I can select my virtual machine and I can select my network interface. And once I select both of these details, it shows me what is the overall effective rule that is getting applied to my network. So it shows you all those details over here. So it'll take a second and you can see what all rules are getting applied on my network security group. Okay, so you can see all the inbound rules, all the outbound rules applicable for you. Now, that's all for today's video. I'll see you in the next one.